when I came to ecology, one of the big disappointment was that there was so much history involved, and I couldn't get the history out of it. So eventually I realized that this idea of history had appeared in other sciences as well, but it doesn't play such a big role. And the idea is that the fluctuations, the uncertainty that the world throws at you is sometimes very big and sometimes quite small.
We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromous. This is Burn Power coming to you on a slightly overcast but very warm day here in Tbilisi, Georgia, where I am surrounded by green, but you can't see it because I'm filming in black and white, which I like. I like the graphic effect. Well, today we have another in our series of Anadromous Dialogues. We have an interesting man who lives in Greece. He's been there for almost 20 years and married a Greek woman, but originally he's from Ireland. His name is John Halley, and he's been following the channel for quite a while and supporting the channel. And he started off in his professional career as an electrical engineer, studied things like physics and other scientific ideas and technological ideas to understand those things, but then shifted midway through his career into studying the ecology. Well, he wanted to talk. We've talked before privately, but this is the first time we'll be talking in a public sense for all of you to share, and he wanted to discuss notions of time. And I thought that would be an excellent thing to talk about. I'm always up for a discussion on time. If you've gone into the back catalog of my videos, you will find the time series, and I think that would be worthy of going back to. Those were more like notes rather than any definitive statement. I am thinking of doing another time video. If you want one, let me know down below, and I'll give you a more logically worked out idea, or at least more contemporary notion of what I'm thinking about time these days, since those notes are from a long time ago, actually. Well, it goes on for almost 2 hours if you look at the clock here, and I think you're going to find it fascinating. So, without any further ado, John Halley, let's discuss time, ecology, and maybe a few puppets. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? And John is living in Greece, but he is not a Greek. So how did you, a little summary of how you got to where you are.
That's correct, yeah. I'm living in Greece. I'm an Irishman, of course. And
Do I detect Northern Ireland there?
No, I'm from Waterford.
Oh,
I
okay.
was born in Dublin.
Yeah. No, you're right. It's a very different accent. So, but it's got,
yeah.
Waterford and Cork have the very hard R's.
A lot of people think I'm American, actually, here in
it isn't a strong accent.
Yeah. So there's a much stronger Irish accent you can have. I can put on the very heavy Irish accent if I need to, but
right.
But usually I don't. So I'm I would say I'm an Irishman living in Greece, professor of ecology here, a regular evangelical churchgoer. I think I can kind of call myself an anadromist a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
By that pattern.
Right.
Now I've been in Greece for over 20 years. I came here in the late 90s, and that was in order to marry the woman I love, and I've been here since.
She's Greek.
Yes, indeed.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so it was the only way we could make things work
Sure.
at the time, and I've stayed here, and I'm very happy here in Greece. I think it's a lovely place to be. But as we in many cases, it's can be a frustrating and difficult experience.
Mm-hmm.
So in the beginning, when I came, it was very difficult because the culture is very different, and was particularly 25 years ago, was very different to Ireland or England. I had spent in between 10 years at least in Britain, because I did I did most of my studies in Britain, and then continued working there for a few years, and then before coming to Greece. And so I began originally as studying electrical engineering,
Mm-hmm.
and then did a master's and a PhD in that. And then I traveled around the world when I finished my PhD for about a year with a backpack. It was about an 8-month hike around the world,
Right.
spending a lot of time in China, Southeast Asia, Alaska, and some other places. And at the end of it, I came back and I said, gosh, I don't think I want to don't think I want to do electrical engineering for the rest of my life. And so I decided to do something to do with the environment, because that trip really impressed itself on me. The environmental issues really impressed themselves upon me then. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to change direction. And I knew a few people in London, and eventually I found a way of converting from electrical engineering to do with lasers and stuff to things to do with ecology and applying mathematics in ecology. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I started off. And then I worked in Britain for about 6 years. And then when I came to Greece, I was working in Thessaloniki.
Mm-hmm.
And then after about 10 years, I got a job as a professor in Yanina, another town in northwest Greece, close to the border with Albania.
Right.
So it's So very strange that I should end up here. It's very anadromous journey in many ways.
Yeah. Yes. It isn't exactly what a person would imagine starting off in the British Isles. But there is this attraction that I think the British and the Irish have always had towards sun. It's like they don't get enough of it, so they move towards sunny places, and so
well. Yes, Yannon is the wettest place in Greece. So I'm kind of I'm sort of a bit of an exception. I never really liked the sun myself. I always I was attracted more to the dark winter evenings and stuff.
No, after 22 years in Alaska, I was completely even the summers there are basically what other people would call spring. With the exception of a couple odd days here and there, we'd hit 30 degrees. That's around getting close to 90 for you fellow Americans.
Has your spring and summer been very rainy over there? Ours here has been remarkably rainy. We've had rain virtually every day, which is very unusual for.
And the Georgians are complaining about it. I'm not.
Yeah. I got a few stories to tell on that kind of thing, but yeah. I did. In Ireland, you get too much rain. I mean, you have to be only a crazy person would like the amount of rain you get in Ireland. But I do miss, but I do like to have more rain
Yeah.
than we get here in Greece.
Well,
So
all I
I enjoy
remember
it.
is that someone from England was complaining in some comment on some video that I didn't know what I was talking about liking rain. It's just like, I'm from England, we get way too much rain. I go like, I spent 22 years in Southeast Alaska. I'm not going to brag, but you should look up the statistics sometime. And it's just ridiculous. I mean, there are some towns I really wouldn't want to live in there. Ketchikan. What is it?
Oh yes, I went through there once
Yeah.
long ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
You were in Haynes, right?
Haynes, yeah, which is a bit more sunny in the summer. Gets more snow than rain in the winter, which I really like.
Oh,
So
yeah.
So
That's right.
now we had talked privately before, and we discussed a little bit about time, and I think we both have a bunch of ideas. So why don't you're the one who's brought it up. Obviously, I mean, I have a whole series on the subject, so I could talk about this for a long time. And in fact, I've been germinating more recent thoughts on the subject. I'm thinking of doing another video because I realize that series is more like a notes that I had for myself, whereas I need to organize my thoughts a little better. But what are you thinking about time? What is your interest in the subject of time?
Well, it certainly your series accelerated my interests in time. I've always been fascinated by time, and I spent a lot of my younger days when I was doing science working on relativity and these kind of problems, because clock time comes in a very interesting way into physics, and all of the things that we've learned through relativity were absolutely fascinating, such as the way in which time speeds up in certain frames of reference relative to others.
Mm-hmm.
It slows down if you're in certain places and relative to other things.
Right.
And then there was all this stuff that came through Einstein, and then there were later developments as well, such as what Kurt Gödel did, she proved that very remarkably that the future could cast a shadow on the past, which was one of the unexpected results, because everybody thought that couldn't happen, and still nobody is fully aware of what it means, because it's highly it's only in highly special circumstances where relativistic effects come into play. Then there was the other thing that happened was a few decades ago there was the Allen aspect experiment, where in quantum mechanics there's this rule, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which says that you can't know both the position and the momentum of any object to greater accuracy than Planck's constant. And somebody said, but supposing you were to know exactly the position, and you could also, if there was a pair of particles produced, because you can have this pair production. So a photon can give rise to an electron and a positron simultaneously. So supposing you measure the momentum of one and the position of the other to infinite accuracy, because it's the other way around. It's the photons produced. And so this was the paradox that Einstein had posed to Niels Bohr, and he said, well, if you can set up your experiments so that you create this pair, and the only way that Heisenberg's uncertainty principle can be imposed is by having action faster than the speed of light, which isn't allowed by relativity. So eventually they did the experiment. They set up the experiment in, I think it was in the 80s. And it was shown that the one that wins out is Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And so people are still trying to work out what all this means.
Yeah.
Anyway, those are great things that were really fun stuff about time in physics. Now, I started off in the physical sciences, but then I moved into ecology, and we do a lot of evolution as well.
Right.
And these are sciences that are very much impacted by the importance of time. But it's time in a different sense. Obviously, people are aware about the importance of time in evolution because you have beep time, a concept which boggles everyone's mind just to imagine just the size of the time involved. It's just by itself, it's a whole adventure. But one of the things that is a problem for a lot of people, say, coming from the physical sciences into ecology or evolution, is that mathematical types like myself, we're always looking for this grand unified theory, and we want to do for ecology what was done in physics, to create some sort of set of equations at the center, and we can prove everything from that. But of course, it never seems to work. And one of the reasons it doesn't work is because ecology, like evolution, is a very history-dependent field. And ecological processes are really history-dependent. So in other words, if you go out into the field, whether it's in Alaska or in Georgia, all of the organisms that you see will depend on the past. So for example, all the large mammals, they wouldn't be around, as we wouldn't be around, if the dinosaurs hadn't gone extinct first. So, and this is always cropping up, and it's a major problem in ecology, for example, because we can't really know very much about the system. We can't very much predict a system because so much is about the relationship of all the organisms to what happened before and the history that went before.
Right.
So this is this is at the heart. If you study, as I do, ecological processes and ecological populations, I mean, often what we're interested in is whether something is going to go extinct, if we have enough of a population left behind that it won't be in danger of going extinct. These are the sort of problems we work on a lot. But we always have this, and so we have lots of fancy computer models, there are mathematical models and all these things, but they don't have, it's more like economics. These all help you to understand, but they don't actually give exact answers or even accurate answers because there's so much going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like in chaos theory, we can get an idea about clouds, or we can get an idea about sand, or an idea about water in a stream, but it never repeats itself. It's always changing. Life is always, and it's not that there's really chaos. It's just that there are so many variables in,
That's right.
And so, it's really true. You never step into the same river twice, because it's always changing. It's eating away at the banks. It's bringing more silt down the river. It's, new grasses may be forming with seeds that were carried from further up the mountain. And I often say to people, 2 + 2 = 4 is a constant. The real issue is it's 2 + 2 what? And 4 what?
Yeah.
And then when you throw time into the equation, so it's 2 + 2, say it's 2 + 2 apples, or 2 + 2 eggs, or 2 + 2 seeds. How long will they remain 2 + 2? How long will they remain 4? So if you come back to apples in a year, well, there's a good chance none of them will be there. Or someone may have taken one, eaten it, spit the seed out somewhere miles away. Or one of them could have rotted there on the ground and started growing. But you won't have apples, but you'll have another result that we can't predict, because in a year, so many possibilities could happen, even among 4 apples, that it would be outside of our ability to understand. And that, to me, is where the time factor comes in, because everything, I think science is really good at nailing down, good enough to get us to the moon or Mars, of nailing down these exact principles and logistics to accomplish all of these tasks. But it's not good enough to tell us, well, how do you deal with for instance, the human factor in all of this? So you were talking about the future, and Gödel's idea that there's a shadow of the future on the present. And what's interesting to me about that is we see that in humanity all the time. We feel things coming. You're talking about ecology. We're feeling like, well, what's going on with it? How do we change it? But we know what's in the way. Us. Not just us. There's a lot of other things going on in the animal world and such, but still, we're the main factor here, and there's no predicting us. And we're the kind of people that can suddenly take an idea. I just made a video on social contagion. We can take an idea. Laughter can be a social contagion, and there's not usually that's not a problem. People laughing, sometimes it really can be. But we can attach ourselves to strange ideas, which is what I think the internet is aiding, increasing that potentiality. So whereas in the past you had the tulip mania in Holland, or you had the Scots all put their money into the Darien scheme to try to settle the Darien Gap in South America without understanding a bit about it. It was total fantasy. They had no idea what they were doing. But it was a scheme that suddenly everyone just said, yes, I'll give you my money. Or you can see different kinds of cult groups. And one of the things I deal with is seances, and how seances got started and eventually became a religion by a couple of sisters who were clearly frauds. And one of them, near the end of her life, confessed it, proved that she was a fraud, that she could do anything a medium could do and tell you exactly how it was done. But it didn't stop it from spreading, because by that time the contagion had already caught on. And I think now we're seeing contagions. Why are people trying to all suddenly, well, it's the whole thing with identity. There's a contagion right there in all sorts of ways. So that's what we can't predict human reaction, much as we'd like to. And if we did, that would be inhuman.
Contagion is usually associated with what I call exponential time. Now, this is one of the interesting concepts. The science, I think, you can take the science a long way, but the science doesn't necessarily serve to make technology or something. But the science of ecology and the science of changes in time in the ecological world can tell us a lot about this whole story, I think. When I came to ecology, one of the big disappointment was that there was so much history involved, and I couldn't get the history out of it. So eventually I realized that this idea of history had appeared in other sciences as well, but it doesn't play such a big role. And the idea is that the fluctuations, the uncertainty that the world throws at you is sometimes very big and sometimes quite small. And so if you look, for example, and so this leads to the concept of red noise or pink noise or 1 over F noise, which was what I spent most of my effort studying.
Could you define those?
And
Could you define those for people who don't know what red and pink
yes,
noise are?
I'm going to come to that. Because when you look at at anything of interest in the environment, such as the amount of rainfall, the temperature, all of these depend on lots of different processes. Some of those processes are kind of rapid things like thunderstorms or things that happen very, very suddenly. Then there are daily cycles, there are daily changes, then you get seasonal changes, and then you get to longer time scales like how sunspots change, how the El Nino affects us, and then you go to still longer time that goes beyond human time scales, such as continental drift, ice ages, and so on. But when you look at a lot of the natural time series, a time series is just a series of observations in time. Sort of one example would be how the human population has changed from, say, the year 0 to the year 2000. That's a time series. So most natural time series, they have a pattern in them. And the pattern is that the amount of variability that comes from different processes on different scales of time is more or less equal. And so this has a specific name. This is called pink noise, or 1 over F noise, or flicker noise. It appeared in lots of different sciences, and people couldn't understand what it was for a long time. But it appears in all kind of evolutionary complex systems that are natural, environmental. And it appears also in ecological populations. And that's how I got involved with it. But it has a major, but I think that this then ties, this is important, I think, for us, because one of the things we try to understand is how much importance should we give to the past and how much importance should we give to the present? Because I think this is a big argument. This comes into politics, the arguments between conservatives and progressives. Now, the thing is that we do not live in an age dominated by this kind of pink noise, which if it was, then we would look back on certain things in history as being crucial and dominating, and we'd see it different. Some of them were more remote, some of them were more recent. But what happens now is that we are in an exponential time, which means that all the things around us are rapidly speeding up. So human population doubles, and it doubles faster all the time. Actually, the human population has, since the 60s, actually started to slow down a little bit. Still increasing, but the rate of increase is slower. But other things like the economy, the technological advances, all of these are increasing in speed. So this tends to force us into a mentality where we put all the emphasis on the present, on the new, and it causes us to forget the past. So I think this is really important for us and relates to what you were saying there about contagion, because that's an exponential process, like COVID.
Yeah. Well, it does relate to the way diseases spread, but it's more of a strange psychological thing. For instance, they discovered that, one of the simplest kinds of contagious behaviors is a yawn. And when
The yawn.
yeah,
Yes.
and you just go, and then the other person wants to do it too. And you'll often hear people say, how come I do this when you're young? We will note this about ourselves. But what scientists seem to think is it's some sort of empathetic response, because it isn't a physical thing. There isn't, but it's rather something inside of us that empathizes with the person's tiredness. But it's almost on an involuntary level. That is to say, you can, if you really think about it, not do that. But laughter is another thing like that, where it can, I'm sure you've had those nights when it seems like everything that someone says is funny,
Yes,
and no one can stop laughing,
It
by the
gets
way,
infectious.
In 10 minutes, this is going to shut down, and then I'm going to send you another link. So just
Okay, all right. Okay.
I'll give you a couple of seconds warning before I do that.
Okay,
But
all right.
that's what I get for being cheap.
Yeah, so that's probably also like some of these groupthink phenomena.
Yeah, well,
which
they're
we
all
see
related.
happening.
And what I've come to see is that propaganda, for instance, is to social contagion what the mafia was to prohibition. That is to say, propaganda takes advantage of that effect and then perverts it for whatever the aims in terms of, but it depends on that. It's like something that it needs to feed on to grow. Propaganda does.
Yeah.
But there's a difference. Propaganda is very pointed from specific viewpoints, whereas social contagion can go all over the map. And there's right-wing and left-wing social contagion.
Yeah, because it's self-assembling to some extent, social contagion or groupthink. It's not necessarily dictated from above. I think this is one of the things that makes the so-called woke movement, if you like, frustrating to its detractors, because in fact, you don't sort of see kind of a grand leader with a scripture or a book to have inspired it. It sort of comes spontaneously.
Right. That's why I liken the woke culture to more of a cargo cult than a leader authoritarian cult, because the cargo cults in the Pacific after World War II, you have these different Melanesian tribes who are living on a fairly primitive level, some of them still in the Stone Age, some just a notch or two technologically up from that, coming into contact with these airplanes and parachutes dropping crates down, and the Americans, of course, are saying, "Here, have a Coca-Cola, and here's some of this and some of that," and and then all of a sudden they were gone. Because who wants to go to Guadalcanal, and they were gone. And then these people said that in their thinking, their ancestors had been providing through these Americans, that somehow the Americans had connected to the ancestors. And in fact, the missionaries would say things like, you shouldn't have that fetish item that you pay so much attention to. That's really troubling spiritually. So, but then what happened is there was a story of, I think it's in the 1950s, they took a man from one of the New Guinea tribes to Australia, and they took him into a museum and showed him, they were proud, to whoever was showing him, the very things he was told to stop using in a museum. And his way of thinking is, they've stolen our gods, they've stolen our ancestors, they've stolen the spirits. and they're keeping them for themselves. That's why the planes stopped coming. But it's this crazy kind of thinking. I think identity politics has all of this in it. And the cargo for us is essentially identity. Because we don't know who we are. Many people don't believe in God, or even people who do believe in God. They think God is in some sort of realm up here, cut off from us, and we're just living on the earth, and we don't have much of a connection to that. But then again, we're cut off from our families. And what I've come to understand, I've had some very interesting conversations about this in the last few weeks here in Georgia, is I tell people, I just don't see many crazy people here. Not the way I do in when I used to live in New
You
York
were
City.
saying this, and one of the recent.
And I said, the reason why is because everybody knows where their family is. Everybody knows what clan they're part of. Everyone knows, in a sense, and if a girl, for instance, if a girl gets pregnant as a teenager here, there might be some words like, how could you be so stupid kind of words. But basically what the family will do was immediately encourage her to have the baby. Once the baby is there, then they'll give it to her mother to take care of. And let her go back. But the thing they don't do, that unfortunately too many American Protestants have done, is just simply say, this wasn't a good thing, this is bad, this is going to be really difficult, especially within the family structure of America. This can lead to a lot of trouble. And later, after people reject Christianity, they look at that and they say, I'd just rather not have children. Whereas here, you see a clear pattern where people are taken care of. Now, what is the quality of that care? What are the social problems of the country? Those are all issues. But what I don't see,
well, the thing is,
living on the
thing is that people in our cultures, Western cultures, the thing is, in order to get back, when you see that kind of family structure and the way people help each other, you think there's a lot of good in it, but you then have to start thinking, okay, but there's going to be a cost to that, and that's going to have a big cost in the loss of personal freedom, and people are not going to want to pay that price up front. This is one of the.
Here's what I can tell you from my own personal research. I've often asked, where did the explosion of homeless people on the streets come from? And the truth is, when I'm going to be 68 in a couple of weeks here, actually, and I remember the early 1960s in the San Francisco Bay Area as a kid. There were very few people. We would have called them bums or tramps or something like that. Very few people like that then, relative to the size of the society. If you were in San Francisco, you'd go to the Tenderloin, you might see a few winos down there and such, but it wasn't nearly anything like what San Francisco is now. But San Francisco is the crux here, because then came the hippies. And the hippies, among other things, were, what can we say? They were individualism, individual freedom writ, in skywriting. It's just like, we're going to be free and we're just going to do what we want. We're not going to let people tell us what to do anymore. And that kind of started it. Also, during the San Francisco, I call it like a spiritual gold rush, and it was just as bad as the actual gold rush in California, as far as
spiritual gold rush
when they got there.
I like it.
When they like, for instance, the news media all descended on the San Francisco area in May and June of 1967, and they declared it the Summer of Love. That, with a bunch of music as well, spread the message out literally into the world as far as it would go at the time. So you had people coming from Europe, people coming from all over the country. I think the first summer it was well over 100,000 people came to San Francisco. And before the end of the summer, it was over. Okay. Now, did you have a thought that you wanted to interject before I continued?
Yeah, I wanted to. So I wanted to follow up on that, what you were saying there. So you would say that it's because the way I would see it is that there's almost a technological inevitability at work here, or it's a huge technological force driving the atomization of our society. You would say that it's more of an ideology that's driven it.
It's both.
Okay.
One moves the other moves it. The way I tend to look at it is that, for instance, countercultural movements tend to create the software, which will then go over to the new hardware. So they tend to create the people alienated enough to live in the new bubble. So the hippies, while they were doing their back to the nature kind of thing, ended up being the Steve Jobs. They ended up being the people talking about, there was a lot of them went over into tech, which is really contradictory in many ways. It's not exactly getting back to the land, but the ideology of personal freedom, again. Let me finish up with what I was saying here. So the media pumped up this summer of love idea, and hundreds of thousands of young people came to the San Francisco Bay Area that summer alone. And then what happened was they started running into serious social problems. Also, no one told them, they were all coming there for the acid and the grass. No one told them everyone had shifted over to speed and heroin. So you started getting these really burnt out people, because the speed was essentially an injectable version of meth. And you also got the abortion clinics, the underground abortion clinics were full. People started living on the streets, and that's the big bang of the homeless problem. And because from then on, you could just go to San Francisco and you'd see people living on the streets. Now that at the beginning, it was this romantic idea of young hippies coming and like living on the streets, and they come up, hey man, you got any money for us and everything? But eventually, like the Vietnam veterans would come home. You would find people, for instance, in San Francisco, they didn't stop coming after what was pronounced the death of the hippie. They had a funeral, they call it the death of hippie, like hippie being someone's name. They had a funeral for him in San Francisco in October of '67, because they realized it was already over. No, that message never got out. The media never reported that stuff. So what happened was, for the next 5 years, people streamed in to San Francisco. Hundreds of thousands of people either passed through or came into the area. There's a lot there, but the main point is that the hippies set off two things in motion. One was the idea that we're all going to have our individual freedom, and it didn't matter what the man told you, whoever the man was. And secondly, it started with, interestingly enough, the very people who were talking so much about love and peace were allowing other people to live on the streets. Not all of them. There were people who saw from the beginning, oh, this is a problem. But unfortunately, that eventually created over time and a variety of different drug epidemics and real estate boosts and such, created the San Francisco of today, the New York City of today, the Los Angeles of today, the Portland, the Seattle, these places where people, they're just massive towns. And they seem to have mushroomed since I left. They've gotten bigger and bigger. And no one has an answer. But that feeds back into the ecological problem, because what these people are doing on the street ecologically is a complete nightmare. you know, because obviously when you're in that situation, you don't care about anything. You know, one
Sure.
could say, well, they're recycling trash and stuff, but they're also defecating on the streets. You know,
I mean, you're talking about the growth of
just in this
homelessness.
case, just homeless people.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
massive, crazy homeless people, and I do mean crazy. And unfortunately, and that's what I was saying about Tbilisi.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
probably see something similar in Greece as well, where you probably don't see nearly as many like crazy people on the streets of Athens or something like that.
Yeah, not really. It's like Georgia, Greece is still a very family orientated
Right.
society. Although people all have their iPhones and everything,
Well, exactly. And that's come here too.
it's still quite conservative, if you like. The family still plays really.
And part of that has to do with orthodoxy, which just simply doesn't change. You know,
Yeah, yeah. That's the brand.
Yes, exactly.
And so, yeah.
But
I mean, I often find myself wondering though, if you know, if when you think about how to suggest, you know, decelerating this atomization of society that's going on, it's very hard to the investments that people have to make. Say if you go and live in the village, we see a lot of people trying to get back to the land. They say, okay, we're going to live as ecological farmers. They don't like what they see, this industrialization of farming. They want more organic, more sort of sustainable kind of farming, which is something, I think is a very important and very, it's something we want more of.
right.
But what happens is an awful lot of these people, they go and they set up farms in the mountains and so on, but just they're not ready for just how difficult the lifestyle is.
I just
how
watched
difficult it is to live in a small community, you know.
I just watched a video by this French woman talking about rural hipsters.
Oh, yeah.
And where basically these people have just gone away from the city, so they go to a small place and they want to live there. And, you know, they're not prepared, and they have to have Wi-Fi, good Wi-Fi, you know, which I think says everything you know about them. So,
well, I remember we went, my wife and I went to a bed and breakfast once, and they said, sorry, we don't have any Wi-Fi here, but you know, you're going to the country, aren't you, to have walks and everything, so you won't need Wi-Fi. And then they said in small letters below, joke only. Well, of course, we started laughing because, to be honest, we were a bit shocked, and we were saying to us, oh no, we have to live without Wi-Fi.
Well, I'm old. We're both old enough to remember no internet. And sometimes in my mind, I remember those first times exploring the little internet in the 1996 or 90, you know, 95 or something. And I remember at that time, yeah, well, sometimes I think, okay, we're done with it now. It didn't quite work out. Next, you know, it'll all just go away. But of course it's not. And, but yeah, for instance, who could have predicted, speaking about chaos theory and the unpredictability, the factors no one could predict, who could predict what social media would do to just the way people approach themselves? No one evidently was thinking at all. You know, Steve Jobs wasn't thinking at all about selfies when he created, you know, the iPhone, because he didn't think about the culture of narcissism that would create. And how that affects the way people act, literally globally, everywhere. You know, you see people like, you know.
Yes, it's an epidemic.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. smartphones are a social contagion, but it's social contagion with the added boost of technology. So it's not just social contagion. It's got this other factor that just spreads it so quickly. And it's that makes, I think, for instance, here's the real problem. You know, you're interested in ecological issues, and I certainly understand why, because, you know, as I sometimes say to my more right-wing friends who are, you say, well, you know, the whole climate change thing, I say to them, look, you don't have to agree that it's all man-made.
And there's a few of them in this little corner of the internet.
Yeah, but I tell my friends, I say, you don't have to agree with all that. But let me just tell you this. You don't have to act like a swine either. You know, you don't have to just leave garbage around. You don't have to waste everything either. That's not, you know, if you're a Christian and you want to go with being a good steward of the earth, that's not being a good steward. You know, I remember in the mid 90s, they started switching out all of the bottles to plastic. They must have figured out some new polymer that makes the plastic stronger. And I remember I was in Alaska at the end of the 90s when they were getting rid of the last bottles, and I was saving the big gallon apple juice jars.
Oh, the glass bottles.
Yeah. And people were saying, but now they won't break and our children will be safer. To which my response then was, you don't understand what this is going to do. And now there's the gyre in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. You know, it's all because you didn't want your babies to have to deal with a world where there's glass.
Yeah,
you wanted them to have their little plastic sippy cups, and you wanted to have a really nice world where no one gets hurt and everyone would. But you see, it's the unpredictability of humanity at that point that is the problem.
That's right. And everything is getting much, much faster. For example, we notice, for example, that the number of cats on the streets of Greece has skyrocketed in the last 5-10 years. Now, I like cats myself, and one of the great traumatic experiences of my life was the death of my first pet, which was a cat. Mm-hmm. But when you study ecology, you study about the interactions, and having huge numbers of cats being sustained by being fed by the citizens is an absolute catastrophe ecologically, because all those cats are not just going to sit there on the roof and so that they can be seen by their adoring neighbors. They're going out and they're hunting, fulfilling their own urge as cats, right. And so they hunt the birds. And
that's the same here.
Yeah, I imagine it would be. And I see this as it's kind of, and I think of this as something that has happened because maybe a lot of people find themselves in broken families and stuff, and they need company. And so pets provide the company. But the thing that is really disturbing to me is the speed at which this has become a problem. And so many of the things that we have to deal with become problems in just a fraction of the time they would have in the past.
Well, I have another observation that I've made more recently about these kinds of problems that multiply. And one of it is, for instance, you'll hear people pay all sorts of lip service to the climate. They're always talking about how we need to take care of the earth. Meanwhile, they're living in a world where this is their reality. This is everything to them. And they don't know where those things go when they die. They don't know where all their computers went. They don't know, for instance, at the same time, people are living more and more for convenience. And the idea of fast fashion made with synthetic blends is an ecological nightmare. And it ends up, a lot of these, for instance, I was talking to someone the other day and they said, yeah, but a lot of these stores will take their clothing back as an exchange program, which the response is, people looked into it as like, well, what do you think would they do with all those clothes? They send them to places like Bangladesh, not for people to wear. They send them to places in Africa just as landfill, because what's in them is so toxic that you can't burn them. They're not like natural fibers or something. So
yeah, exactly.
But
I see a lot of students and so on in my circle. They come up with great ideas. I saw some projects recently about ideas about how to deal with the plastic in the Pacific Gyre, and so there are all these responses, but the problems are coming faster and faster and faster as this exponential time accelerates.
No, the fast fashion thing is huge now, and there are companies like Shein is a Chinese company which literally puts out clothing for you to wear once or twice and throw away.
Wow.
And not only that, they of course rip off a lot of designs, but they design clothing. And of course it's women buying most of this, because women have always been a target of a certain kind of propaganda. They have a page where literally they'll put out hundreds of new designs every week. And all you have to do is wear it once or twice to look new and fashionable, and then it's basically done.
Wow.
And this is, you should look it up sometime. There's people on YouTube who've done some very interesting studies on it.
Xi'an, is it called? Xian, like the city?
No. Well, there's two things. Look up the word fast fashion.
Yeah.
And the other word is Shein, is SHIEN, or is it SH? No, it's SHE, like she, and then IN.
Yeah.
Shein.
Shein.
Yeah, her,
Okay.
she.
Yeah, I guess.
So, yeah, but they're not the only ones at all. Most of the people most of the corporations that occupy like all the malls and places, the endless Zara stores and H&M stores, work on the same principles as well. They just don't, they aren't quite as crazy as Shein, but they're basically not much different. And I think that, for instance, what I'm seeing is there is a kind of an inbuilt stupidity that we all have around things we don't understand. So, and I've often used this example because it's, for me, a perfect example. Let's say you want to buy a new refrigerator. Well, what do you know about refrigerators? Now, you're an electrical engineer. You might know a little bit more than the average person. But the average person, like me, doesn't know much at all. I don't know what all the ratings mean, and I don't know which is a good one. The refrigerators here are quite funky, and they're coming from somewhere further east, I'm sure, and they're not quality, but that's what you have to buy, because that's what they have in their electronics stores here. So, and they put refrigerators and washing machines in their electronics stores here, which is another issue altogether. But so, and the people who are selling them to you don't know much about them, but they know more than you, enough to sell you the old stuff that's not moving. So, but if I go in there, I am just a mark. I'm just someone who is waiting to be taken advantage of by someone selling things who needs to get rid of, they've got a few extra of a certain kind of, I don't know, Taiwanese brand of refrigerator.
Yeah, well, that's it's always been.
Right. And that's how they take advantage, is by the fact that you don't know much. Well, but people used to have, they'd be kind of stupid in one area, but they had the areas where they knew about. So, a farmer would know about growing things.
Yeah.
And a plumber would know about how to, pipes and fittings and such. Where now, more and more, this is the whole world. And so they don't know anything outside of it, which breeds a mass kind of so they're getting messages that say, save the planet, save the planet. They don't know what the planet looks like unless they're on some kind of extreme adventure. But usually what they're doing is watching someone on YouTube going on extreme adventures.
Was it you that did that podcast where it was some of the most stupid answers to questions that had been found? Yeah. I mean, how many moons? How many moons does Earth have?
Yeah.
7.
The best one I ever ran into in person was a woman who came on a rafting trip in Alaska in the summer. And she was complaining about how cold it was. She said, I thought it was supposed to be warm. He said, why did you think that? She was like, well, Alaska's next to Mexico on the map, because in American maps, they're always down below.
Oh, right.
Next to Mexico.
They're put down
and so
there.
is Hawaii down there.
Oh, no.
To be fair, this woman did not speak with an English accent, an American accent. So, but still, there are Americans, I'm sure, who are just as dense. But, she got really worried when it got so cold. I'm just like, and I heard her saying that. I just walked away trying to contain myself because it was just like, oh, no.
But you say she could be excused a bit because she came from somewhere else.
Well,
maybe.
A bit. But that's like pretty, like I said, that's pretty basic stuff. You should know north and south. You should know where Alaska is.
Yeah, for sure.
If you're going to go there.
I wanted to ask you another question about sort of going back to the original theme.
Sure.
But going more into your area a little bit. Because there's these concepts of linear time and cyclic time.
Mm-hmm.
So all of my digression into exponential time and pink noise time were sort of they were kind of scientific, or what I would say, so they come from technical areas. But there's a very fundamental distinction in civilizations that are built around cyclic time and linear time. Have you? Well,
I tend to think it's all both. That is to say, I think we're going in one direction, but we're going like this.
Yeah.
But every time you make a loop of some sort of pattern, a circle, it's like every time you play a vinyl record, you're losing some of the particles in the record. Every time you use anything, you're losing a part of it. So, but I think properly, we should be living in calendar time. Calendar time is the most human.
You mean the seasons and the days?
Yeah, and of course, that will all depend on where you live. But everywhere has calendrical patterns, things that happen. So if you live in a very warm area in Bangladesh, there's a monsoon season coming.
Well, calendar time, a person who lives in cyclic time and a person who lives in linear time will both agree on calendar time.
Exactly.
But some people, I believe that the Roma people, gypsies, for example, they don't really think in terms of we started in the past in the book of Genesis or whatever, and we're heading towards the book of Revelation or what.
That's because they start in India, and India has always had this very, very, very large cycle. 100,000 years going around.
Yeah.
And the Roma people started in India, so it makes perfect sense to me that they have some vestige of those beliefs. The Greeks had some sort of idea of cyclical time as well, the ancient Greeks. But I think,
really,
to me, it's clear, no matter how you look at it, long time ago, these things weren't here. Now they're here. Eventually they will go. And I see nothing that tells me they're coming back.
Which things?
Anything. That is to say, I see it moving in a line, but it moves in circles in the line. And the circles are like the calendar time. Or it's not just the calendar.
Wouldn't you say in Christian civilization, we live with a sense of a teleology that we began somewhere and we have a destiny.
Oh, yeah.
To go somewhere else.
Well, that's Owen Barfield's whole point, is that he says when you start with the Jews, they're living in a radically different world than the ancient pagans did. Because the ancient pagans saw, the change of seasons. They saw the rising of the sun. They saw these things that seemed to go around in circles, whereas the ancient Jews saw beginnings and endings. And now I will meet people who say, well, nothing ever ends. I go like, yeah, I would agree that things do, as someone once said, the past isn't merely not fully past. The past isn't over, basically. The past is, I can't remember who said it, but the past isn't merely, it's not even the past, because, for instance, you can find holdovers of everything somewhere if you look around. If you look at astrology, well, that's ancient Babylonian religion. If you look at the Roman Catholic Church and you look at the clothing they're wearing, you go like, oh, that's kind of Rome, isn't it? And if you look at in English courts, you see they're wearing wigs, and I go like, well, I guess the Baroque era didn't quite die out there. So you see these weird holdovers, but to me, they're all going together. Now, that doesn't mean it's some sort of determinative thing. And we were starting to get to this a little earlier, where are things on a determinative course? Jacques Ellul says that there are times when the destiny, the fate takes over. And that is, for instance, it was really bad timing to start to want to stop Hitler in 1938. Whatever was going to come was going to come.
Yeah.
So he says what we did, his friends and I, they realized it was already over by then. He said, we started thinking about after the war. So, but once certain things are locked in, like right now, I'm pretty sure we're locked in for some ecological catastrophes. But that doesn't mean,
some people say that.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that's all there is.
Yeah.
We have to start thinking about recovery. We have to start thinking about, I used to talk to people like this. There are problems that are immediate. Like, let's say there's a dam that's developing cracks. And I think our culture is like that. It's a dam that's held things back, but it's developing cracks, the old Western culture. And it's going to blow eventually. The cracks are too great. So, but some people need to go down and warn the people directly in the path of the water. You better get ready for what's coming. But other people need to go way down here and start working on the next dam.
Yeah.
I look at myself as being more like that in my work, because I'm already thinking about, okay, this is going to fall and that's going to fall. We're going to become more abstracted. We're going to have more temptations to live a disembodied existence. But I'm looking around going, but in a way, as much as I don't want to see the kind of catastrophes which probably will come, and maybe within this century, nevertheless, there's a good part to them. They will stop our stupid delusions about living in this perfectly technological world, because that will never, it'll never be the world they imagine. It will always move towards authoritarianism and control. So in a sense, but so if people say, well, what do you think is going to happen, Bern? I go, like, my money's on chaos.
Oh, yeah. So what did you think of that? One of the things they're talking about now, I heard a conversation last week between Peter Diamandis and Mo Godal about artificial intelligence. And one of the guys was saying that probably the speed at which this thing is taking off means that there will be a crisis within few years.
I think that's a bit overblown. because I think it will create more imbalances. We have another 10 minutes before the next switch.
Okay.
It will create more imbalances and maybe some radical imbalances. But I'm also sensing during this time people who are starting to say, wait a minute, I want something real. Now, it's not everybody yet, but for instance, in Georgia, where they're not quite as developed as we are in America, I would say they're living in the 1980s or so here compared to America, which there were worse periods. It isn't the greatest period, but there were worse periods. But I think like this one, but I think that, when I start telling them this and this and this, I said, the people here are trying to get to this kind of freedom. Let me tell you my perspective from the other side, where we've already achieved that. And now the freedom is starting to destroy the society. That everyone is an atomized individual and has no connection to anyone else. So why should I not do what I feel I should do? And there are no more responsibilities towards the nation, the family, the community. People don't understand that, particularly once you've gone through the educational system. It's something, but also once you spent too much time staring at TikTok or Instagram or something, you get disembodied. And I think there are more people who want something real, which is why I'm doing my thing in October this year of inviting people here. Is that going to change anything? No. But here's the point. It's not about changing things. It's not about starting a movement. It's about simply planting the seeds. Like I say, I'm thinking 10, 50, and then not 10, 50, 100 years from now. Because I already see, okay, the chaos is going to continue. Yeah, people will get sucked into this. There are already people who are having, shall we say, relationship issues with AI. And and that will continue because we're lost. And so anything that can go wrong will. Will AI, one of the things that I've interacted with AI on all sorts of levels. And at this moment I say, okay, yeah, no, you can't really make a work of art. No, you can't really understand what I'm asking. I just watched the YouTuber, kind of a crazy guy from Slovakia, who said, I'm going to go wherever the AI tells me I should go. So he asked ChatGPT to send him somewhere, and it sent him to some tiny village in Peru. And it was just filled with crime. And it was just, he just said, eventually he found this tribe of Indians, nowhere near where the AI told him they would be. Because the AI had no sense of reality.
That story is a surreal mixture of the super scientific and the super superstitious, sort of juxtaposed one on top of the other.
Right. Well, that's the thing.
Sounds like that.
I'm absolutely convinced of is all the AI is programmed by people who all share the same beliefs. Because once you get up to certain questions, they're not allowed to go beyond a certain point.
Talking about AI and music, because you're very you've thought a lot about music. It really impresses me that people are telling me, oh, the music that's created by these AIs is very impressive. And it recalls to me somebody else whom you've mentioned from time to time, Brian Eno, who wrote all his pieces. Many of his pieces, he says he wrote in a sort of a random way.
Right.
And specifically with the purpose of proving that you could do great music without believing in God.
Well, yeah, and he liked to create music for environments, dead environments, airports, liminal spaces. And I actually talked to him a bit. I remember showing him, telling him an idea I had for a film, and I was saying like, yeah, it should all be done through a closed circuit television in in a apartment hallway at the door. You can tell the whole story there. In a sense, this was back in the 1980s. I was jumping the gun on all the found footage films. But what he was most fascinated with it is it's just like, he said, I like the idea of just letting the television run. It's just like, because telling the story, there's no story. It's just the space that interested him.
Right.
And I think that there's a guy who has a channel. He's about 55 years old. He's an excellent musician named Rick Beato. I mean, and if he hears any music, he'll go like, okay, that's like a D7 diminished, flatted diminished 7th, 8th, 9th, or whatever. I can't do all the music terminology talk. But so he was given, he talked about AI recently, and he said what he felt was going to happen was, he said, for one thing, a lot of the music we already have that's popular is essentially created very much like AI.
Oh, yes.
That is, we're already at this point where people, and he says, there will be people who what it is, and much in the spirit of Brian Eno, they want the music for wallpaper. They want it just to fill in the space. They want it to fill in your cafe space. They want it to fill in a silent spot here. They want it to be something they can nod along to in their earbuds, So, but since the music is already like that anyway, many people won't notice when it, becomes completely artificial, because it's just another tick on the scale.
Yeah, because it's already formulaic, a lot of that stuff.
Exactly. And the way it's produced, all you have to do is say, produce this song with in the style of Max Martin out of Sweden, who's this guy who produces a lot of stuff. And no one's going to notice the difference, because quite frankly, no one notices if that's Dr. Luke or Max Martin or all these other producers who get paid millions of dollars to produce people like Taylor Swift or Katy Perry, and all of the pop divas of the last 20 years have worked with these people, and these are really the people controlling the musical sound. And because they make so much money, everyone bows to them. And I think, one thing I'm convinced of, the reason that I moved into trying to understand puppetry was because I realized that music had essentially, by the end of the 20th century, pretty much lost its soul. It lost its heart, because it had been eviscerated by the nihilism on one side, and on the other side, the commercialism. And eventually the commercialism won, because it could take anything that anybody could produce and find some way to turn it into a sterile product. So the heaviest death metal song can be used to play with Monday Night Football. And I've heard this. It's just like, coming up tonight, the Dallas Cowboys, giving it this warlike feel. So there's no, we've entered the place. But I think that there's a kind of a spiritual vitamin deficiency that's happened. And I think that what it is that just as if you don't get vitamin D for long enough, or vitamin C for long enough, your body will start to, you won't notice it at first, but eventually, without vitamin C, you'll get rickets. You'll develop a disease, and it won't come on you right away. And I think the same thing is happening culturally, where we've given, in a sense, our children all these little devices, all this stuff. You say, you're free, do whatever you want. You can become whoever you want. You want to be a princess? That's good, my son. Just like, do whatever you want. But it's anemic. It's deficient in human spiritual vitamins. And because of that, I think there's going to be a pushback. And I think,
continuing with what you were saying, do you think that people generally have become a bit like we've lost our nerve a bit? In previous societies, in order to keep people down, you had to threaten them with hanging and guillotines and so on. Whereas now, we can all be controlled by much milder stimuli. I worry at times that maybe what's actually happening is that we're losing some sense of agency all the time. Have you heard this? What do you think of this?
well, here's what I think. In the last 4 years, I've heard the word agency more than I have in my whole life. And most of the time I heard it, it was in relationship to a Hollywood movie star trying to get a better deal for a movie using an agency. And I think that
kind of agency,
yes,
okay.
but there's
right.
a relationship in the sense that, and we also talk about representation, which is what agents do. They represent you to the book publishers, or you to the film studios. So, and I think, see, in the 60s, I remember people talking about love all the time. People were talking about love, not because they knew what they were doing, but because it was being watered down into strange patterns that had nothing to do with love. And I think agency, as in, I need to act for myself, to represent myself, to be myself, to act. Can we act autonomously? I doubt it. So I think that, yeah, it's already lost, in the sense, whenever you hear someone talking about something over and over, they're talking about it as T.S. Eliot said, we're always trying to describe, we always have the words to describe what's happened after it's already done. So in a sense, all the technology and stuff, we lost our agency a long time ago. That isn't that we've all lost it, but rather the fact that it's something that so many people talk about right now. On one hand, that's good, but on the other hand, it just becomes, it's too easy for it to become a word that people don't, they all think they know what they're talking about. So I think one of my rules is to try to put, to take concepts that people are using and put it into my own language as much as possible, because then I know I understand it. So what is meant by agency? What do you mean by it?
You want me to tell you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's that to actively change your circumstance and the circumstances around you, and for it to come from within yourself or within part of what you've learned. I mean, it could be passing on something as well as having thought of it yourself.
Right.
So I would say that. That's what I mean by it.
And of course, my big question then would be, what's agency and what's social contagion? If a person says, I need to get my body together, so they start going down to the gym and eating a keto diet, are they doing that because they came up with that idea for themselves? Or are they doing it because it's the thing to do for men of a certain type right now, and they want to be like the men of a certain type? So it's, to me, I think, as Jacques Ellul points out in his book on propaganda, well, one of the worst things you can do is assume that you're above it. That somehow you understand things. He points out that the intellectual who thinks that, propaganda I understand it, it's not affecting me. He says that person is the most propagandized person, which is why we see so often various stereotypes around certain sorts of behavior, is because different kinds of people are affected by different kinds of propaganda. I am, you are, we all are. And of course, in my life, as I point out in my social contagion video, in the 70s, I was definitely being pushed around by social contagions in our Jesus People group. In the beginning, it was pretty interesting. But by the middle of the 70s, we were being pushed around by things we had no idea about. We didn't know where they were coming from. It was just something.
You said that the Jesus People became something of a cult.
My group did.
In your later experience there.
Yeah, my group did. Because it was,
that's interesting.
We started off almost like Christian anarchists, and in the sense that we believed in God, we believed in the Bible, but we didn't have a church to go to on Sunday. So people just said, well, go to any church you want, which I'm kind of glad they did that, because I went to, I think, the deadest church I've ever been to in my life. It was this evangelical free church in San Rafael, California. And I said, you know, I was so glad I'd already become a Christian, because if I'd gone to that place first, I would have just been like, who would ever want to come to a place like this? It was just so, it was a morgue, you know, it was sad. It was just, and unfortunately, churches can turn into that kind of place. But so the first couple of years, I'd say 3 years in particular, that I was a Christian, 15, 16, 17, let's say, no, we'll say 16, 17, 18 years old. Amazing years. I had amazing experiences, understood things I'd never understood before. I could go on and on about that period. But eventually we started getting into the limits of what we knew in our own understanding of the Bible and of Christ. And so we had to incorporate more and more, discipline was the official word. We had to incorporate more, what is it? It's just rules, basically, because we were having some really serious problems with some of the freedoms that we had.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, if I look during that period, now, of course, no one ever used the word agency now. And I would say I was free to choose when I became a Christian. I was free to choose for most of those first 3 years. By the 5th year, there were other forces that were interfering with that freedom to choose, which is how I would describe agency. You know, that is to say that you have to be able to, I don't think anyone can completely be free. There's no such thing as complete freedom, which is, I think, one of the problems the left has. But the right, in a different way, has the same problem. One has it in terms of, you know, I don't want the government telling me what to do. And the other one is the government will eventually create the utopia if we keep pressuring them long enough. But I don't think that's true. But again, to go back to our original discussion, most of this happens because people have no sense these days, and by these days, I mean for a good chunk of the 20th century up until now, we've lost our sense of place in time. We've lost our sense of history. We've lost our sense of memory. We've consigned our memories to these things.
Yeah, that's because the importance of the past becomes diminished in an age of exponential time.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I've heard people say time is moving faster, and I said it's not time that's moving faster. Time does what time does always, but it's us inside of time, and it's our relationships within time. Now, how do you define time?
I don't. I don't define time. I cannot. I would say I can even clock time. It would take me a while to define clock time. Right. But and as for time in general, including Tarkovsky time and all this,
right?
Barry, I wouldn't even begin to try.
Well, would you agree with me that it's not mere duration?
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I thought you made the point very well when you compared the time as experienced by somebody who's just been bereaved with the time and other types of time.
Yeah.
I think this very much shows that in the general sense, time is much more than clock time.
Right. I have what I call sick time. And as soon as I realized I've entered sick time, I do certain things. One, I'm not one of these people who tries to power ahead and go to work anyway and all this stuff. I just stop. I just rest for a few days. I just turn into a blob. I don't worry. But secondly, if I get any kind of doubts about my life at that time, I don't even take them seriously. Any kind of doubts about what I'm doing because I'm sick.
Yeah.
And I can't handle that now. That's beyond. Right now, the first goal is to get the body well. Then we'll deal with, how are you living now?
Yes. If you can do that, that's a very good
and of
step.
course each illness has its own sort of time, because an illness which will put you on the toilet seat all the time is very different from an illness which will be clogging your whole face up, or doing any number of other things that illnesses do. So we enter these different stages, and of course it's different for different people. So there's no one time for, measles doesn't affect everyone in the same way, and this is one of my problems. See, we've got what technology has done through its use of science, but I would say it's a use of science and it's not proper science, is that it has given us this much more abstract world. And people don't know how, this is what I meant about not having reality. All they've got is this thing here. They're looking out. It's like Timothy Leary called it an aquarium. They're looking into this aquarium at things, but that's not reality at all. That's just, that isn't to say this is bad, but for instance, I know very well I don't really know you. This is better than not knowing you, but I have no idea of your physical essence. So in other words, I don't know if you're taller than me or shorter than me. I don't know if you slump when you walk, or I don't know, I don't know how you eat. I don't know if you talk really loud all the time, or, there's all this stuff that I don't know. Now, I can intuit certain things, but this is quite this up here is quite a barrier to actual knowledge. So, for instance, as many times I've talked to Paul Vanderklay about 5 or 6 times, and as many times as I've talked to him, I finally met him in person last year, and it was just very different.
Yeah.
And you always have to remember that. That this abstracts the world for you, but it also means it heightens. For instance, it's really good at spreading social contagion for some reason, even though there's no one physically present.
Yes. Yeah. Now you've talked about reality, and you have various arguments. You bring various arguments in this. One is the bear argument, that if I show you a bear, you'll understand what reality is.
I follow Rookmacher and I follow Jacques Ellul, who kind of disagree with each other, but I put them together in my mind. And Rookmacher is basically questioning, for instance, I have very little time for people who tell me reality is a social construct or a construct of
right. Yeah.
And and that's the reason I made a video, which not a lot of people have seen, on Alaskan animals. They might have thought that was just some tour of animals.
Yes, I'm remembering the bear comment.
Yeah, because the whole point of this is the bear has a reality of which you know nothing. However, you have to exist in its world. And when you're in its world, it really doesn't matter what your philosophical outlook on life is, if that philosophical outlook on life does anything to hinder your relationship to that bear. That is to say, if you say, I'm constructing this in my mind from images of bears in the past, and it's just like, you know what? the best thing you could do is probably listen to me on the tour, and I'm telling you, you don't know anything, listen to me, because I have to spend time with these animals. So that the bear's reality is, it's just like, I'd like to take Hegel. Hey, Hegel, come here, deal with the bear now. It's like I often think, because our relationship to real world animals is so low that we've turned them all into these cute creatures.
Yes.
That I think that we don't, that's part of the problem with the cats you were talking about, is that the cats become this, you don't want to hurt the cat. So therefore they breed like mad, and it's a scary thing to hear them breeding in the roofs. But we don't understand the animals anymore because we don't live with them the way,
Yeah, that's right.
We don't understand why would you say that the devil is a goat? And I'd say, like, you should watch a male goat enter the pen of a female goat in heat. You will understand in 5 seconds why the devil is compared to a goat.
All right. Yeah, very good. Very good. We see a lot of goats in Greece, and I must say my life is much the richer for seeing more of them.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, humans find it, we're finding it difficult to, it's like our society has gone from kill, kill, kill to cute.
Right.
With only the briefest phase where you actually respect the animal for what it really is.
Right.
Now, one of the other things which you have, and this is one for me is a very interesting thing, is that you argue that the puppet is in some sense a healing device for this problem.
There are people who use them for therapy, but
I don't mean that sense.
Not healing.
I mean
it's just an antidote to the abstraction of the screen.
Because this is something that very much surprises me as well. You talk about the people who say, "Byrne, what's with the puppets?" And I also it isn't something that comes immediately to a lot of people. In Greece, there's a rich tradition of the shadow puppetry through the Karagiosis character. Right. But to most of the people that I've met and the few showings I've gone to, they haven't moved me in any way. So I have difficulty connecting.
Right.
So I was thinking I might ask you, how would you describe the moment when you understood that this was something important and not just something, something different or curious?
It was a series of steps. I didn't wake up one day and go, like, puppets. And in fact, I had very little connection with puppets growing up. I don't think I ever saw a real puppet show. The closest I came is to say watching King Kong on television, watching a few little puppet kids programs, Davy and Goliath, maybe the Thunderbirds. But, these kinds of things were on television. But I never really even thought about them as puppets. I just said, oh, okay, this thing with this weird guy walking around. Later, I started studying music. And when I went to Switzerland, to L'Abri, my main area of focus was I was really curious as to why music changed so much. So I started from my time there to really break it down. I was there for almost a year and gave a couple of lectures before I left. But then I went to New York City, and then I spent all the rest of the time studying music history and all of the things that went into it from the other arts as well. And so even there, I didn't start thinking about puppets at all yet, But then I did discover these films by Jan Schwankmeyer and the Quay brothers, both of whom I met. The Quay brothers I'm proud to call friends, and they make films. I show people their short films, and I say, like, okay, your doctoral thesis will be doing 6 months on this short film, because it's that complicated. It's like, what have you watched? And I show people this, and they're like, you know, what have I just seen? Because it's so tactile. It's such a tactile thing. But when I first started watching the films, and I was lucky enough to see them at first in a theater, a repertory theater in New York, a cinema. I remember thinking to myself, well, those were really interesting. And at first I thought it was because it was animation. You know, lots of people like animation. I like animation. And eventually I knew I was going to move to Alaska, and I had a year to go. I had never really collected videos before, and I started collecting videos before I left because I wanted to show people in Alaska, where I knew I wouldn't have access to all these wonderful theaters, movie theaters. I started to collect videos, so I got Tarkovsky films, and then I got the Quay brothers, and I got Jan Schrankmeyer videos, which were hard to find. And I kept looking at them more and more and going like, wait a minute, what if it's not the animation, which is really interesting, but what if that's not what I'm connecting to here? What if it's the actual puppet? So that was, the first was being exposed to these films. Second was that thought. So even before right in the last year before I left New York, I went to a couple of puppet shows. One was very interesting. It was a Vietnamese water puppets show, which is unusual in that you don't see the puppeteers, and all the puppets are in the water. And they're telling these old traditional folk tales and such. And that made me start thinking, but I still hadn't crossed the barrier yet. In 1996, which was the same year I left New York, I went to Europe, and I went to a Guignol show there, which is for children. And I had a friend of mine went with me, and unfortunately, they played a pre-recorded version, so that is the music and the dialogue was there, and the guys were just kind of going through the actions following it. Eventually, though, so that was then in the year 2000, I said to myself, okay, let me look for puppets in Eastern Europe this time. I went to Vienna and saw a marionette show that I thought was interesting. It was a nativity play. Then I went to Bucharest, Romania, and I saw what I now recognize as more of a new style show, where the puppeteers and the actors were on the stage together. But that was done mostly for kids. And then I ended up in Prague on this trip in 2000. And I remember the really surprising thing to me was I wasn't in Prague to see the building. I was there to look for puppets. And then it was December, the year 2000 still wasn't overblown with crowds yet. But I remember looking around at, it was about December 14th or so, and I'm looking around at the square, in the Old Town Square, going, I'm in Prague. Just like, oh yeah, I'm in Prague. And I found some puppets then, but I still hadn't made the jump. I was still in the same zone of thinking, like, there's something here, because I hadn't quite found what I was looking for yet. And then in 2005 came this trip that I took. It was a trip from which I broke my wrist right before, the week before I left to go on it. And so I had to go with a cast on my hand. And then I lost my job because I had a kind of a sleazy manager at the radio station who was looking for an excuse to get rid of me. And he used him giving me a leave of absence to get rid of me. But I remember there was a certain point after I learned that I'd lost my job, and I said to myself during this trip, I'd seen so many interesting things. And I described this in my recent video on puppetry, the puppet lecture I gave here to a group of Russians.
You've given that lecture twice.
Actually, I have, but there are two different videos, but those are both the same. But I gave.
Are they the same, or have you
added
stuff in the second?
No, they're the same. There's minor differences, but it's not. In 10 years you can watch the other one and you'll say, "Oh, I don't quite remember this part." But But on this trip, I saw a real guignol show. I
So
saw
a real?
a real guignol. Guignol is a little puppet. He's like a punch character.
Yes.
Little rascal puppet, we'll say. Because the little rascal puppet, Punch, Guignol, Polichinelle, Kasparov,
Okay.
all these characters are these weird little rascal puppets that are everywhere.
All right.
I saw one of those. I saw students performing these really experimental puppet shows with strange materials like stone and cut grape branches from, just very odd materials and things, broken puppets. I saw a shadow puppet show there in Berlin. I saw a really funny German show, the funniest show, and I said, okay, Germans do have a sense of humor because this is the funniest thing I've ever seen. I saw Polish puppet shows, and I talked to people about what puppetry meant behind the Iron Curtain. This was 2005. Then I went to the Czech Republic, and I went to the town that has the big museum. I went to another town that was responsible for many of the changes in the 1970s. And I went with them on a puppet tour for one trip, which was quite an experience. And then I ended up in Prague. Lots more went on there, but finally I found this one group, Buchty a Lotki, Cakes and Puppets, and they were just had the most wildest imagination, and it looked like they were just finding things in their backyard and putting them on the stage. I said, we could do that in Alaska, because we have a lot of things in our weird backyards. So, which is what I went. And then the last stop on that trip was in Salzburg, Austria, where I saw the Salzburg marionette puppets, and they were it would look like little people walking around on the stage because they had 9 strings each attached to them, and you couldn't really see them. And I thought, wow. And I remember I just also, while I was in Salzburg, found out I had lost my job at the radio station. And I remember just kind of looking down the Salzach River, I think that's the name of it, from the bridge at night after the show, going like, if I had to do this whole trip again, including losing my job and breaking my wrist, would I do it again? I just go like, yeah, break my wrist. Let's start. Let's do it again. Because it was that important to me. And that started me also making puppets and working with puppets in Alaska. And many ideas I had been germinating during the earlier phase suddenly said, aha, this is what I was working towards. But I also had been thinking, since I saw the end of the rock era in New York City, and I could see it was winding down, except for, there's kind of a little bit of a holdover in the early aughts. I was thinking like, okay, in this future we're moving into, music doesn't matter anymore. Music will not be, leading the revolution or anything like that. And interestingly enough, in all the woke stuff we've seen, we haven't seen musicians at the forefront,
Yeah.
Also, I thought, and then there's film, and nowadays anybody can make a film. And anyone, I have the editing tools, I can make films. But it's not really happening that way because people are so distracted to keep watching. By the way, we've got 10 more minutes, and then I'm going to call it quits on this. So.
Yeah, we should. 10 minutes is good.
Yeah. And then I thought, I thought, what would be music and film were two of the most important arts of the 20th century for a variety of reasons. And I thought, so what's going to be the arts of the 21st century? And I've heard people say video games, digital CGI stuff. And I'm going like, no, that's now. What it will have to be is it'll have to be the opposite. Not the same thing, but the thing that says something else. And I realize it's puppets. Because, and I think dance is another important thing as well. Because both puppetry and dance share a lot in common. And that is, you can watch them on videos, but it is not in any way the same thing as being in a small room and watching a puppet show. And I emphasize small room because the bigger the room gets, the more problematic it gets. And I think
You like to dance yourself?
Huh? Do I dance?
You like dancing yourself?
I've always been a clown.
Oh yeah, like bit like myself.
And I never
Yeah.
really thought about it again until much later. I like it because it's the opposite of some things I like because they're not me. And dancing is not me. And one of my very best friends here is a principal dancer at a ballet troupe. And I'm just, we get along great, but I'm just like, I can't believe you do that. The things she does. But it's also because when you see a ballet dancer in the flesh, you have to really pay attention because they're doing some things that if the move is slightly wrong, they could break their leg. It's that intense.
All right.
And it's the same thing with the puppet. The real puppet, I mean, I got to the point where I understood that all I had to do to start getting people to think about things is put some object there before the show and just walk away and let people start to look and wonder what it's going to do and make sure it doesn't look like something normal. So I developed a whole aesthetic.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it's very unexpected to me.
Yeah.
And I would never have expected puppets.
Right.
I mean, obviously, of course, I wouldn't expect them on my own, but it's not something that I was expecting from the beginning. And so it makes me think a bit. For you, it was those movies by Schrankmeyer,
Jan Schrankmeyer from the Czech Republic, and the Quay brothers. If you go to my those videos I've made, I mention them in there. But
yeah, okay.
But I think that what it is that, see, I had this experience in 2005 when I was traveling, doing the first of several big research trips on puppetry in Europe. And I was in Berlin, and my friends who lived there said, well, Bern, we're going to the show, and there's going to be 3 bands playing tonight. And so I went, rock club. I've been to a lot of rock clubs. I'm watching the bands play, and I'm looking around and going like, okay, this person's just sitting against the wall because they're way too cool. This person over here is just kind of like, yeah, going with the music. And I looked and I said, these people would do this kind of thing no matter who was playing here. Nothing surprising is going to happen. This is all very well-worn path. Music, in a sense, there's very little musically that would surprise the people coming to this place.
Yeah.
But later, when I took puppets around America for 2 months, and people came up afterwards. They'd never seen anything like this before, because I'd realized in Berlin, I was seeing puppet shows that were surprising. And without the element of surprise, you can't communicate. There has to be something someone says that, oh, what was that? What was that weird little thing you said? What was that about? Otherwise it's just like, oh, okay. It's just like even a couple who's been together for many, many years. If they don't have some independent experiences to bring to talk about, if all they've done is see the same things over and over, and they know exactly how the other person's going to react, well, you need a little element of surprise now and then to spark more conversation, to get a new perspective. And that's how I'm looking at puppets. So I've done some things with my puppets that people, I just start telling people what I've done, and they're like, well, what do you mean you used a rubber tube and put it in oil? And, what do you mean you used dead fish heads, dried fish heads? What do you mean you use, because what I saw in, for instance, these student performers in France using all these materials, I said, aha, use anything. I don't have to just make little homunculi. I don't have to just make little animals. I can use anything.
Yeah, I like the sense that as you describe it, there's a mysterious power somewhere, and we can't quite pin it down. I find it, I don't know if but I know that you're interested, for example, in masks.
Oh yeah.
I love the Venetian masks.
I've just done a whole research project on Venetian masks and the history of it, and it's just fascinating. A lot of people think they've just gone on forever, but they haven't. They only started up again. They were shut down by Napoleon, and then they started up again in 1979. And I think there were a few people who continued the art form, but basically they were banned by Napoleon, and it's really complex why. But no, I just read this whole thing, and my mind is blown, because that's one of the other things I realized, that in my research for puppetry and masks and all these related fields, I'm dipping into something no one else is dipping into. And other people in the theater obviously are.
Yeah,
but I'm doing it in a very different way. So, for instance, I'm very attentive to every time the mask is discussed in relationship, particularly in the books I've been reading, about identity. Because and I'll immediately take it back here and go, that's very interesting. So, well, we've only got a couple of minutes here.
That's right. Our
It's
time is nearly up, but it went fast.
Yeah. And I'll probably put this up, not this weekend, but the weekend after. I'll let you know when I'm going to put it up. And I think I'm going to call it something like Time and Ecology or something like that, because those seem to be the two things that went through most of this.
Well, we talked quite a lot about puppets as well, and the meaning of it.
But then puppets for me relate totally to time, because they're material. And for me, everything that's matter relates to time, because everything inside of all matter is moving around. And without time, there is no movement.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
Otherwise, it would all be static. So that's why the old three-dimensional model of the universe doesn't work anymore, is because you have
we're
you know,
so much to talk here. Well,
so much.
Another
we'll do it
Brian,
again.
maybe.
We'll do it again. I really appreciated this. And it's a shame.
Okay.
I know you wanted to go to the gathering in Georgia, and it's a shame you had other things come up, but I am going to do it again. So hopefully you will work it around your schedule and make sure you can come next time.
We'll certainly make it to Georgia, one way or the other.
But no matter what, you're not that far away. Greece is, to me.
No, it's relatively close.
Yeah. A lot closer than Alaska, as I'm discovering.
It's only an hour, an hour's jet lag away.
Right. Okay, John, have a good night, and we will talk again.
Enjoyed talking, Bern. God bless.
Take care. You too.
Okay, so there you go. A very interesting discussion was had with John Halley, and we'll probably see him again sometime on the show. And all I can say is thanks for lasting this long. If you're one of the ones who wants to support the channel, it can be done. There's a PayPal link below. It's much appreciated. My situation here has changed as a result of the events of the last few years. So, but if you don't have any free access to liquidity at the moment, you can provide help by just simply sharing the video and liking it. Every person who likes the video is helping the channel, because what you're really saying is, oh, algorithmic gods, please notice, Bern, and spread these videos. Okay, I'm out of here. As the Georgians say, droabit. Temporarily, we will meet again.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.